Imagine a boy who never completed a single year of formal schooling, yet grew up to become one of the most celebrated scientists in Europe. A man who ran away from home as a teenage apprentice with nothing but the clothes on his back, yet died one of the wealthiest men in America. A printer's devil who became the friend of kings. A tradesman who revolutionized our understanding of electricity. A colonial subject who helped birth a nation. A man who never attended university, yet received honorary degrees from Oxford, Cambridge and St Andrews. This is the story of Benjamin Franklin, inventor, scientist, diplomat, writer, philosopher, and founding father. A man who proved that in the New World genius could emerge from anywhere, unbound by the rigid hierarchies of the old. He flew a kite in a thunderstorm and captured lightning from the heavens. He charmed the French court in a fur cap and became the face of American independence. He invented bifocal glasses, the lightning rod, the Franklin stove, and the flexible urinary catheter. He founded libraries, fire departments, hospitals, and universities. He signed both the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. His face appears on the $100 bill, the highest denomination in common circulation. Yet Benjamin Franklin began with nothing. No inheritance, no advantages, no connections. Just a sharp mind, an insatiable curiosity, and a work ethic that would define American ambition for centuries to come. Before we begin this journey through the extraordinary life of Benjamin Franklin, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. I'm always curious to know where in the world you're watching from tonight, so please leave a comment and tell me. And now, let us travel back to colonial Boston, to a world of candlelight and handset type, of royal governors and Puritan sermons, to the moment when one of history's most remarkable minds entered the world. The Boston of 1706 was not the great American city it would become. It was a provincial outpost of the British Empire, a collection of wooden houses clustered around a harbour on the edge of a vast and largely unknown continent. The population numbered perhaps 7,000 souls, most of them descended from the Puritan refugees who had fled England's religious conflicts 2 generations earlier. The city occupied a peninsula connected to the mainland by a narrow neck of land called Boston Neck, which flooded at high tide, effectively turning the town into an island twice daily. The streets were unpaved, turning to mud in rain and freezing into treacherous ruts in winter. When spring came, the thaw transformed every lane into a river of muck that could swallow a man's boot to the ankle. Pigs and chickens wandered freely through these streets, serving as the city's garbage disposal system. Housewives would toss kitchen scraps directly into the road, and the animals would dispose of them within minutes. The smell of salt water mixed with wood smoke, animal waste, and the various industries that sustained colonial life. Tanneries with their acrid chemical stench. Breweries releasing the sweet smell of fermenting grain. Rope walks where hemp was twisted into the cables that rigged sailing ships. Shipyards where the sound of hammers and saws echoed from dawn to dusk. The harbour was the city's lifeblood. On any given day, dozens of vessels crowded the wharves. Coastal traders from other colonies, ships from the Caribbean carrying molasses and sugar, occasional vessels from England bringing manufactured goods, news from home, and royal proclamations. The waterfront teemed with sailors, merchants, labourers, and the countless tradesmen who serviced the maritime economy. Coopers making barrels, sailmakers stitching canvas, chandlers like Josiah Franklin providing the candles that would light ships' cabins and Boston's homes alike. Church bells marked the hours, calling the faithful to worship multiple times each day. Boston had more churches per capita than any other city in the colonies. Old South Church, where the Franklins worshipped. King's Chapel, built for Anglicans. The Old North Church with its distinctive steeple. Each denomination competed for souls and social influence, and the religious debates could be as fierce as any commercial rivalry. Boston was a deeply religious community, shaped by the Calvinist theology that its founders had brought from England. The Puritan faith emphasized hard work, frugality, education, and constant self-examination. Idleness was sin, luxury was suspect. Every moment of life was to be lived in awareness of God's judgment and the possibility of eternal damnation. Children were taught from infancy that they were born sinful, that only God's grace could save them, and that most of humanity was destined for hell. The Sabbath was strictly observed. No work was permitted on Sunday, not even cooking. Meals were prepared the day before and eaten cold. No travel was allowed except to and from church. No recreation was tolerated. The Sabbath began at sundown Saturday and ended at sundown Sunday, and during those 24 hours Boston fell silent except for the church bells and the voices raised in psalm singing. Education was taken seriously, at least for boys. The Puritans believed that every person should be able to read the Bible for themselves without relying on priestly interpretation. Massachusetts had passed a law in 1647 requiring every town of 50 families or more to maintain a school. Boston had several schools, including the prestigious Boston Latin School, which had been educating the colony's elite since 1635. But by 1706, the fierce religious intensity of the founding generation was beginning to soften. The colony's original charter, which had made church membership a requirement for voting, had been revoked by the English Crown in 1684. A new charter installed a royal governor and opened political participation to property owners regardless of their religious affiliation. This was seen by the old guard as a catastrophic compromise, a betrayal of the Puritan vision of a city upon a hill. The merchant class was growing wealthy through trade, and with wealth came a gradual relaxation of the old strictures. Merchants' wives wore fine clothing imported from London. Their houses boasted luxuries that would have scandalized the founding generation. Furniture made from mahogany and walnut, silver tableware, painted portraits, books beyond the Bible and theological works. The new generation was coming of age, born in America, who had not experienced the persecution that drove their grandparents to cross the Atlantic. They were colonials, not refugees. They were beginning to think of themselves as Bostonians, even as Americans, not simply as English Puritans in exile. Into this world of transition, caught between Puritan piety and commercial ambition, between colonial dependence and nascent American identity, between the certainties of the past and the possibilities of the future, Benjamin Franklin was born. His father, Josiah Franklin, had arrived in Boston from England in 1683, fleeing religious persecution. Josiah came from Ecton in Northamptonshire, where the Franklin family had worked the same land as blacksmiths and farmers for generations. But Josiah was the youngest of 4 sons, and there was no inheritance for him. He learned the trade of a dyer, colouring cloth in the various shades that fashion demanded. More importantly, Josiah became a dissenter. He rejected the authority of the Church of England and joined with those Puritans who believed that the established church was corrupt, that it retained too many Catholic practices, that true worship required a simpler, purer approach. Under English law, this made him a criminal. Dissenters could be fined, imprisoned, or worse. When persecution intensified, Josiah made the momentous decision to leave England forever. He sold everything, gathered his wife and 3 children, and in 1683 boarded a ship for Massachusetts. The journey across the Atlantic took 2 months, packed into a wooden vessel that creaked and groaned in every storm. Many passengers died during such crossings. Disease, accidents, storms. The Franklin family survived. They arrived in Boston with almost nothing, Josiah discovered that his trade as a dyer was not in demand in the colonies. There were few customers who could afford the luxury of professionally dyed cloth. He had to reinvent himself, and he chose the trade of tallow chandler and soap maker. It was humble work, but necessary. Every household needed candles, and the cheapest candles were made from animal fat. Josiah would purchase or collect fat from butchers, render it in great kettles, pour it into moulds around cotton or flax wicks, and sell the finished candles. Soap was made through a similar process, mixing the rendered fat with lye made from wood ashes. The chemical reaction created a product that could clean clothes and bodies more effectively than water alone. The work was hard, the smell was terrible, and the profit margins were thin. But Josiah was industrious and frugal. He built a modest business, acquired a house on Milk Street near the Old South Church, and established himself as a respectable tradesman. His first wife and child bore him 7 children before dying in 1689, probably from complications of childbirth or one of the many diseases that claimed young women in colonial America. Josiah was left with 7 children ranging from infancy to early childhood, and he needed a wife desperately. A widower with small children could not manage alone. He remarried within months to Abia Folger, and this marriage would prove remarkably fruitful. Abia would give Josiah 10 more children over the next 20 years, 17 children in total, though not all survived to adulthood. Infant mortality claimed several, as it did in most colonial families. Abia came from Nantucket, the daughter of Peter Folger, one of the island's pioneering settlers. Peter Folger was a remarkable man in his own right, a miller, teacher, surveyor, and occasional poet who had learned the Wampanoag language and served as interpreter between English settlers and Native Americans. He was also a freethinker who wrote poems criticizing religious intolerance and advocating for liberty of conscience. This independent spirit passed to his daughter. Abia was literate, which was unusual for women of her class and time. Most women, even those from respectable families, could not read beyond simple Bible verses, if that. But Abia could read fluently, and she valued education. She would pass this love of learning to her children, particularly to Benjamin. The Franklin household on Milk Street was crowded, noisy, and perpetually short of resources. Every penny mattered. The house itself was modest, probably a 2-story wooden structure with a ground floor devoted to the tallow chandlery. The workshop would have dominated the space, filled with kettles, moulds, racks of drying candles, and barrels of raw fat in various stages of processing. The family lived in the rooms above and behind the shop. Privacy was impossible. Children shared beds, sometimes 3 or 4 to a mattress. In winter, they slept close together for warmth, as heating fuel was expensive and carefully rationed. In summer, the crowded sleeping quarters were stifling, the heat from below rising through the floorboards, mixing with body heat and the ever-present smell of tallow. Meals were simple and frugal. Bread and butter formed the staple, cornmeal mush, salted fish. Occasionally meat, though fresh meat was a luxury. Vegetables from the small garden behind the house in season. The family would gather around a large table, Josiah at the head, Abia managing the younger children, the older children helping serve and clean. But despite the cramped quarters and modest circumstances, the Franklin household was rich in something more valuable than material comfort: intellectual stimulation. Josiah Franklin was a thoughtful man, more intellectual than his humble trade might suggest. He had received some education in England, enough to read and write competently, to engage with ideas, to think beyond the daily requirements of his trade. He loved conversation, and often invited educated friends to dine with the family. Ministers debating points of theology, merchants discussing the latest news from London. craftsmen sharing observations about their trades. The conversation would range across topics that children in most tradesmen's households never heard: politics, philosophy, natural phenomena, moral questions. Young Benjamin would sit at the table, eating his simple meal, listening with intense concentration as the adults talked. He learned that ideas could be as engaging as any game, that the life of the mind was open to anyone willing to think seriously, that education was not confined to schools and universities, but could happen anywhere people gathered to discuss important questions. His father also encouraged reading in a household where books were precious commodities. A single book might cost a week's wages for a working man. Paper itself was expensive. The leather bindings, the metal clasps, the labour of printing or copying by hand, all of this made books luxury items that only the wealthy could acquire casually. But Josiah valued education enough to sacrifice for it. He accumulated a small library, perhaps a dozen volumes in total. The Bible, of course, read daily and treated with reverence. Sermons by Puritan divines like Cotton Mather, whose writings dominated Boston's religious culture. Devotional works designed to encourage godly living. But Josiah also owned Plutarch's Lives, a collection of biographies of great Greeks and Romans that would profoundly influence Benjamin's moral development. These were not Christian stories, but pagan histories, tales of men who achieved greatness through virtue, courage, and wisdom before Christ was born. The Puritans accepted such works because they demonstrated that moral truth existed across all times and cultures, that God had written his law on human hearts even before the gospel was preached. From Plutarch, the young boy learned that character was built through action, that greatness could be achieved through virtue and discipline, that the lives of the ancients offered lessons for the moderns. He read about Lycurgus, who gave Sparta its laws, about Solon, who reformed Athens, about Alexander, who conquered the known world, about Cicero, whose eloquence saved the Roman Republic, about Cato, who chose death over dishonour. These stories shaped Benjamin's imagination and his aspirations. He would return to these biographies again and again throughout his life, measuring himself against the heroes of antiquity, asking himself whether his own actions would be worthy of inclusion in such a volume. Abiah Franklin was a warm and capable mother, managing her enormous household with efficiency and good humour that astonished those who witnessed it. 17 children, though not all living at home simultaneously, was an overwhelming responsibility. The cooking, cleaning, mending, nursing, teaching, disciplining, the endless cycle of pregnancy and childbirth, each one carrying the risk of death. Yet Abiah managed it all while also helping with the business, serving customers in the shop, keeping the household accounts, ensuring that the family lived within their means. She was, by all accounts, a strong woman with a cheerful disposition and a sharp intelligence that her son clearly inherited. She was literate, unusual for women of her class in that era. Most women could not write their own names, signing documents with an X. But Abiah could read and write, and she passed her love of reading to her children, particularly to Benjamin. In his autobiography, Franklin would write that he could not remember a time when he could not read, suggesting that his mother taught him his letters before he could even form memories of the learning process. The Franklin household was not wealthy, but it was rich in something more valuable: intellectual stimulation, moral seriousness, and the conviction that learning and virtue mattered more than material success. These values, absorbed in early childhood, would shape everything Benjamin Franklin would later become. Every child who reached working age was an economic asset, another pair of hands to contribute to the family's survival. The older sons were apprenticed to various trades. John became a tallow chandler like his father. Peter went to sea and was never heard from again, a loss that devastated Josiah and made him determined that Benjamin would never follow the same path. James learned the printing trade in London and would return to establish Boston's fourth printing house. On January 17, 1706, Abiah gave birth to her 8th child and Josiah's 15th. They named him Benjamin, a biblical name meaning son of the right hand. He was baptized the same day at Old South Church, a Congregationalist meeting house that still stands in Boston today. The haste of the baptism reflected Puritan concerns about infant mortality. In an age when perhaps 1 child in 4 died before reaching adulthood, parents wanted to ensure their children's souls were saved should death come quickly. But Benjamin Franklin would not die young. He would live 84 years, long enough to see the world transformed and to help transform it himself. The Franklin home on Milk Street was cramped and modest. Josiah's tallow chandlery occupied the ground floor, filling the house with the acrid smell of boiling animal fat. The family lived in the rooms above and behind the shop, parents and children sharing beds, sharing space, sharing everything. Young Benjamin grew up surrounded by the rhythms of his father's trade, the cutting and rendering of fat, the pouring of candles in moulds, the wrapping and selling of soap. It was unglamorous work, but it taught valuable lessons about chemistry, about the properties of different materials, about precision and patience. Josiah Franklin was a thoughtful man, more intellectual than his humble trade might suggest. He loved conversation and often invited educated friends to dine with the family. Ministers, merchants, and craftsmen would gather around the Franklin table, discussing theology, politics, and the affairs of the colony. Young Benjamin listened, absorbing everything, learning that ideas could be as engaging as any game. His father also encouraged reading. Books were expensive in colonial America, often costing a week's wages for a working man. But Josiah valued education and managed to accumulate a small library, the Bible, of course, and sermons by Puritan divines. But also Plutarch's Lives, a collection of biographies of great Greeks and Romans that would profoundly influence Benjamin's moral development. From Plutarch, the young boy learned that character was built through action, that greatness could be achieved through virtue and discipline, that the lives of the ancients offered lessons for the moderns. He would return to these biographies again and again throughout his life, measuring himself against the heroes of antiquity. Abiah Franklin was a warm and capable mother, managing her enormous household with efficiency and good humour. She was literate, unusual for women of her class in that era, and she passed her love of reading to her children. In his autobiography, Franklin would write that he could not remember a time when he could not read. The Franklin household was not wealthy, but it was rich in something more valuable: intellectual stimulation. In many colonial homes, especially those of tradesmen, education extended only to basic literacy and arithmetic. But in the Franklin home, ideas mattered. Questions were encouraged. Curiosity was cultivated. And Benjamin had curiosity in abundance. From his earliest years, he asked endless questions. Why does wood float? Why does iron sink? What makes the tide rise and fall? How do ships sail against the wind? His father answered when he could, or directed the boy to books that might explain. Boston Harbor became young Benjamin's playground and laboratory. He learned to swim at an early age, becoming one of the strongest swimmers among the local boys. He invented crude flippers for his hands and feet to increase his speed in the water. He taught himself to float on his back for hours, allowing himself to be carried by currents and studying the behavior of the water. The sea was everywhere in Boston. The city's economy depended on it. Ships brought goods from England and the Caribbean. They carried Massachusetts timber, fish, and rum to distant markets. The harbour was crowded with vessels, and the wharves bustled with sailors, merchants and labourers loading and unloading cargo. Benjamin watched it all with fascination. But his father had other plans for his youngest son, plans that would shape the next crucial years of his life. Josiah Franklin had 17 children to provide for, but limited resources. Most of his sons were apprenticed to trades, learning skills that would allow them to earn their living. His daughters would marry, becoming their husbands' responsibilities. But for Benjamin, his 15th child and 10th son, Josiah harboured a special ambition. He would tithe his son to the church. The practice was rooted in the Old Testament concept of the tithe, giving 1/10 of one's increase to God. Josiah had 10 sons by Abiah. He would dedicate the 10th to religious service. Benjamin would become a minister. In Puritan Boston, the ministry was the most respected profession, the only learned calling available to colonial youth. Ministers required extensive education, which meant years of formal schooling followed by study at Harvard College. It was an enormous investment for a tradesman's family, but Josiah was determined. At age 8, Benjamin was enrolled in Boston Latin School, the most prestigious educational institution in the colony. Founded in 1635, it was America's first public school, designed to prepare boys for Harvard by drilling them in Latin, Greek, and classical literature. For a few bright months, Benjamin excelled. He loved learning, devoured his lessons, and rose to the head of his class with remarkable speed. His teachers praised his quickness and predicted a brilliant future. But Josiah Franklin was doing his own calculations. The cost of keeping Benjamin in school, even a public school, meant lost labour and incidental expenses the family could ill afford. And beyond Boston, Latin school loomed the far greater expense of Harvard. Tuition, room, board, books. Years of study during which Benjamin would contribute nothing to the family's support. After less than a year, Josiah withdrew his son from Boston Latin School. The family simply could not afford it. He tried a cheaper alternative, enrolling 10-year-old Benjamin in a school run by George Brownell that focused on practical subjects, writing and arithmetic rather than Latin and theology. Benjamin did well in writing, but struggled with arithmetic, a weakness that would puzzle him later given his facility with numbers. But even this modest schooling was brief. At age 10, Benjamin's formal education ended forever. He would never attend another school, never darken the door of a college, never earn a degree. Josiah brought his son into the family business. At 10 years old, Benjamin Franklin began working full-time in his father's tallow chandlery. The work was tedious and unpleasant, cutting wicks, filling moulds, tending the fires under the great kettles of bubbling fat, running errands, serving customers. The smell of rendering animal fat permeated everything, clinging to clothes and hair, impossible to wash away completely. Benjamin hated it. He later wrote that he developed a strong inclination for the sea, dreaming of escape to a sailor's life of adventure and freedom. But Josiah, who had already lost one son to the ocean, refused to permit it. He was determined to find a trade that would satisfy his restless son's intelligence while keeping him safely on land. For the next year, Josiah took Benjamin on walks through Boston, visiting workshops and observing various craftsmen at their trades. They watched joiners shaping wood, bricklayers building walls, turners working their lathes, braziers casting brass. Josiah hoped something would capture his son's interest. These excursions gave Benjamin an invaluable education in practical mechanics. He observed how things were made, how tools functioned, how skilled hands could shape raw materials into useful objects. The knowledge would serve him well in later years when he turned to invention. But nothing captured his imagination the way books did. While his father searched for the right trade, Benjamin taught himself. He spent every spare penny on books, borrowed volumes from anyone who would lend them, read by candlelight after his work was done. He discovered Bunyan's Pilgrim's Progress and read it until he nearly memorized it. He found Plutarch's Lives, the same book his father owned, and immersed himself in the noble deeds of Greeks and Romans. He stumbled across Daniel Defoe's essay on projects, which argued for practical improvements to society through mutual benefit organisations. The idea would stay with him. At 12 years old, Benjamin Franklin was an apprentice candlemaker who dreamed in books. And then his older brother James returned to Boston with a plan that would change everything. James Franklin was 9 years older than Benjamin, old enough to have finished his own apprenticeship and established himself as a printer in London. In 1717 he returned to Boston and set up a printing shop, the fourth in the city. Printing was one of the most important trades in the colonial world. Printers produced everything from legal documents and government proclamations to books, pamphlets, and newspapers. A good printer needed literacy, mechanical skill, business acumen, and often served as a writer and editor as well. Josiah saw his opportunity. He convinced James to take Benjamin as an apprentice, and in 1718, 12-year-old Benjamin Franklin signed indentures that would bind him to his brother until he reached 21. 9 years of service in exchange for training in the printing trade, room and board, and one complete set of clothes at the end of his term. The contract was standard, but it would prove anything but ordinary. Benjamin took to printing with the passion that candlemaking had never inspired. The print shop was a world of ideas made tangible. Every day brought new text to be set in type, new arguments to be composed, new knowledge to absorb. The work was physically demanding. Composing text required hours of standing, selecting individual letters from the typecase, and arranging them backward in the composing stick. The press itself required strength to operate, pulling the lever that brought the paper down onto the inked type. And there was endless clean-up, washing the forms, distributing the type back into their cases. But Benjamin loved it. For the first time in his life, his work engaged both his hands and his mind. He also had access to books, far more than he could ever have afforded to buy. Customers would sometimes lend books to apprentices, or James would bring home volumes to print. Benjamin would stay up through the night reading by candlelight, then return the books early the next morning before they were missed. He developed a method of systematic self-education that would serve him throughout his life. When he read something that impressed him, he would try to recreate it from memory, then compare his version with the original to identify his weaknesses. He taught himself to write persuasive prose by studying the elegant essays in The Spectator, Joseph Addison, and Richard Steele's influential London periodical. He would read an essay, wait several days, then try to rewrite it from memory. When he compared his version to the original, he could see where his vocabulary was limited, where his arguments lacked force, where his style was clumsy. Then he would practice those specific skills. He converted essays into poetry to expand his vocabulary, then back into prose. He scrambled the arguments and practiced rearranging them to improve his logical thinking. It was a training regimen as rigorous as any athlete's, applied to the craft of writing. The relationship between the two brothers was complicated. James was the master, Benjamin the apprentice. James could command and punish. Benjamin owed obedience. But Benjamin was brighter than his brother, quicker to learn, more creative, and both of them knew it. The inequality of talent strained against the inequality of authority. In 1721, when Benjamin was 15, James Franklin made a bold decision. He would start a newspaper, only the fourth in the American colonies. He called it the New England Courant, and it would prove controversial from its first issue. Unlike the existing Boston newspapers, which simply reprinted news from London and official proclamations from the colonial government, the New England Courant featured original essays and satirical commentary. James published pieces critical of the Puritan clergy's promotion of smallpox inoculation, mocking their support for a medical procedure that many Bostonians considered dangerous. The establishment was outraged. The religious and political authorities viewed the current as a threat to public order. How dare a mere tradesman presume to criticise his betters? But the controversy sold papers. The current became the talk of Boston. And young Benjamin watched, learning that in print a commoner's words could carry as much weight as a gentleman's, that ideas mattered more than social rank. He longed to contribute to the paper, but James dismissed his efforts. A teenage apprentice had nothing worth publishing. So Benjamin devised a scheme that would become one of the most famous deceptions in American literary history. Late at night, after the print shop closed, Benjamin wrote letters in a disguised hand and slipped them under the shop door. The letters were signed Silence Do-Good, supposedly written by a middle-aged widow, witty and opinionated, who offered her thoughts on everything from fashion to education to the treatment of women. The Silence Do-Good letters were brilliant satire, mocking the pretensions of Boston's elite while championing common sense and practical virtue. They were written in a conversational style that made them accessible and entertaining. Readers loved them. They became the most popular feature in the current. James published 14 Silence Do-Good letters without knowing who wrote them. His friends would gather in the print shop to speculate about the author's identity. Some guessed it was a well-known minister. Others suspected a sophisticated lady of Boston society. No one imagined it was the teenage apprentice setting type in the corner. When Benjamin finally revealed himself as Silence Do-Good, James was furious. His younger brother had made a fool of him. The power dynamic in the shop shifted perceptibly. Other apprentices and even customers began to see Benjamin differently. He was not just a clever boy, but a genuine writer. James responded with increasing harshness. He exercised his authority as master over apprentice, using physical punishment to reassert control. The beatings grew more frequent and more severe. Meanwhile, the New England Current's attacks on authority caught up with its publisher. In 1722, James wrote something that offended the colonial government so deeply that he was jailed for a month and then forbidden to publish the newspaper. The solution was to transfer the paper to Benjamin's name. At 16 years old, Benjamin Franklin became the nominal publisher of the New England Current, though everyone understood that James remained the true editor. To make the legal fiction work, James publicly cancelled Benjamin's apprenticeship indentures, but privately, he forced Benjamin to sign new secret indentures, binding him to continue serving until age 21. This gave Benjamin leverage. He was now legally free, even though James still tried to treat him as an apprentice. The contradiction could not hold. The relationship between the brothers deteriorated completely. In September 1723, after one beating too many, 17-year-old Benjamin Franklin made a decision that would change his life. He would run away. In colonial America, breaking an apprenticeship was a serious offence. James made sure that no printer in Boston would hire his runaway brother. But Benjamin was determined. He sold some of his books to raise money for passage, and in October 1723, he boarded a boat bound for New York. He left Boston with almost nothing, a few coins, the clothes on his back, and a mind full of knowledge that no one could take away. The boat journey to New York took 3 days through rough seas. Benjamin arrived in the city hungry, dishevelled, and alone. He was 17 years old, a fugitive from his legal obligations with no connections and little money. He went immediately to the shop of William Bradford, New York's only printer, hoping for work. Bradford had no positions available, but he mentioned that his son Andrew, who ran a printing shop in Philadelphia, might need help. With nothing to lose, Benjamin decided to continue south. The journey to Philadelphia became an ordeal. He took a boat across New York Bay to Perth Amboy, but the vessel was caught in a squall and nearly capsized. Benjamin spent 30 hours soaked to the skin, bailing water, before they finally reached shore. He walked 50 miles from Perth Amboy to Burlington in the rain, arriving feverish and exhausted. At Burlington, he caught a boat down the Delaware River to Philadelphia. The journey took all night, and when Benjamin finally arrived on Sunday morning, October 6, 1723, he was dirty, dishevelled, and utterly spent. He had $3 in his pocket. He walked into a bakery and asked for 3 pennies worth of bread. The baker, unfamiliar with Boston currency, gave him 3 enormous, puffy rolls. Benjamin tucked one under each arm and walked down Market Street, eating the third, so hungry he barely noticed how ridiculous he must have looked. A young woman standing in a doorway watched him pass and laughed at the sight. Her name was Deborah Reed, and 7 years later she would become his wife. But on that Sunday morning, Benjamin Franklin was just a bedraggled stranger stumbling through Philadelphia with bread under his arms. He followed other people to a Quaker meeting house, sat down, and promptly fell asleep during the silent worship. When he woke, he wandered to the waterfront and found a clean-looking house where he was given a bed. He slept for hours. The next morning, Monday, October 7th, 1723, Benjamin Franklin began to build the life that would make him famous. He found Andrew Bradford's print shop and asked for work. Bradford had no openings, but he sent Benjamin to Samuel Keimer, another Philadelphia printer who needed help. Keimer was an odd character, a former London printer who wore his beard long and kept the Jewish Sabbath. He hired Benjamin on the spot. Philadelphia was different from Boston. It was newer, more diverse, less bound by rigid religious orthodoxy. Founded by Quakers under William Penn's charter, the city welcomed people of all faiths. English Quakers mixed with German Lutherans, Scottish Presbyterians, Irish Catholics, and Jews. The Quaker emphasis on tolerance and practical commerce created an atmosphere of openness that contrasted sharply with Puritan Boston's stern conformity. The city itself was growing rapidly. Laid out in a grid pattern, it was more orderly than Boston's medieval tangle of streets. The Delaware River provided access to the Atlantic, making Philadelphia a major port. By 1723, the population was approaching 10,000, and the city was on its way to becoming the largest in the American colonies. Benjamin thrived in this environment. At Keimer's shop, he demonstrated skills that surpassed his employers. He was faster at composition, more precise in his work, more knowledgeable about the technical aspects of printing. Within weeks, the employer-employee relationship had inverted. Keimer relied on Benjamin to manage the shop. Benjamin found lodging with the Reed family, the same household where the young woman who had laughed at him on his first morning lived. Deborah Reed was about 16, cheerful and pretty. Benjamin began courting her almost immediately with her parents' blessing. He made friends easily in Philadelphia. His wit, his learning, and his conversational skills drew people to him. He joined a philosophical society where young men gathered to debate and discuss ideas. He became known as an entertaining companion and a brilliant talker. But then Governor William Keith intervened with an offer that seemed too good to be true. Governor Keith was impressed by the articulate young printer he met through social connections. When Keith learned that Benjamin wanted to establish his own printing business, but lacked the capital to buy equipment, the governor made a remarkable proposal. He would personally back Benjamin in setting up a print shop. All Benjamin needed to do was travel to London, select the best printing equipment, and purchase it using letters of credit that Keith would provide. The governor would pay all expenses and become a silent partner in the new business. It was an extraordinary opportunity, the kind that could establish a young man for life. Benjamin's father, whom he had visited briefly in Boston to attempt reconciliation, advised caution. Josiah Franklin told his son that the governor's promises seemed too generous, too unlikely to materialize. But Benjamin, 18 years old and ambitious, wanted to believe. He returned to Philadelphia, accepted Keith's offer, and in November 1724 boarded a ship for London. He carried letters of introduction that Governor Keith had promised to provide, or so he believed. The letters were supposed to be delivered to the ship before it sailed. The voyage across the Atlantic took weeks. As the ship approached the English coast, Benjamin asked the captain about the governor's letters. The captain said they were in a bag with other mail and would be sorted when they reached London. When the ship docked and the mail was finally sorted, Benjamin discovered the truth. There were no letters of credit from Governor Keith, no letters of introduction, no financial backing, nothing. Governor Keith had lied. The entire scheme was a fantasy, perhaps something the governor genuinely intended but had no means to execute. Keith was known for making grand promises he couldn't keep, for encouraging young men with airy assurances that came to nothing. Benjamin Franklin was stranded in London, 18 years old, thousands of miles from home, with no money, no equipment, and no prospects. It was December 1724, and he was completely alone in one of the largest cities in the world. London in 1724 was overwhelming. With a population approaching 600,000, it was by far the largest city Benjamin had ever seen. Boston had 7,000 people. Philadelphia had 10,000. London had more people in a single parish than in all of colonial Philadelphia. The city was a maze of narrow streets, packed with humanity from every nation and station. Wealthy merchants in fine clothes brushed past beggars in rags. Street vendors hawked their wares with ear-splitting cries. Hot pies, fresh oysters, knives to grind. The cacophony was constant, overwhelming, a symphony of commerce and survival. Hackney coaches clattered over cobblestones worn smooth by centuries of traffic. Sedan chairs carried wealthy ladies through streets too narrow for carriages. Porters bent double under enormous loads balanced on their backs. Apprentices ran errands, dodging between pedestrians. Pickpockets worked the crowds with practiced skill. The air was thick with coal smoke from thousands of household fires and workshops. London's famous fog was not natural mist, but a choking combination of moisture and smoke that turned buildings black, stung the eyes, and made breathing difficult on the worst days. The smell of human waste pervaded everything, as the city's primitive sewage system simply dumped refuse into the Thames or collected it in cesspits that periodically overflowed. The River Thames itself was both highway and sewer. Ships from around the world crowded its waters, bringing goods from India, the Caribbean, the American colonies, the Mediterranean. The docks stretched for miles, a forest of masts and rigging. But the same river received all of London's waste, making it a foul, dangerous waterway despite its commercial importance. For a young man from the colonies, it should have been terrifying. But Benjamin Franklin possessed a quality that would serve him throughout his life, an unshakable confidence in his own abilities. If Governor Keith would not support him, he would support himself. He found work immediately at Samuel Palmer's printing house in Bartholomew Close, one of the finest print shops in London. Palmer's establishment was far larger and more sophisticated than anything Franklin had seen in America. The shop employed dozens of men, operated multiple presses, and produced work of extraordinary quality for the most demanding customers. The master craftsmen there were initially skeptical of the young American. Colonials were considered provincial, behind the times, crude in their skills. But Benjamin quickly demonstrated abilities that matched or exceeded those of the London journeymen. He could compose type faster than most of them, his fingers flying through the typecase with practiced precision. His knowledge of the printing process was comprehensive. He understood not just the mechanical operations, but the craft's finer points. which papers took ink best, how to mix ink for different purposes, how to adjust pressure for different types of work, his finished pages were clean, precisely aligned, and free of the errors that plagued less careful workers. The London pressmen had a custom that Franklin found wasteful and foolish. They drank beer throughout the workday, believing it gave them strength for the heavy labour of operating the press. Some men would consume 6 pints during a single shift, spending much of their wages in the alehouse and arriving at work half drunk. Benjamin drank only water, earning himself the nickname the Water American. He argued that beer actually weakened the body and dulled the mind, that bread provided better energy for sustained work, that sobriety allowed for better craftsmanship. His fellow workers mocked him at first, but his superior work output gradually convinced some of them. The man who drank water could lift as much, work as long, and produce better quality than those who believed alcohol was necessary for strength. From Palmer's, he moved to an even larger establishment, Watts's Printing House near Lincoln's Inn Fields. This was one of the great printing houses of London, employing 50 men and producing books for the most prestigious publishers. The shop occupied a multi-storey building, with different operations on different floors. Ground floor for the heavy presses, upper floors for composing, binding and storage. Franklin worked in the press room, the most physically demanding position. Operating a hand press required significant strength and stamina. The pressman would ink the type, position the paper, pull the heavy lever that brought the platen down onto the type, lift the platen, remove the printed sheet, and repeat the process hundreds of times per day. It was exhausting work that left men's backs aching and their hands blistered, but Franklin thrived on it. He was young, strong, and motivated. He worked faster and more accurately than most of his fellow pressmen, earning good wages and the respect of his employers. He lived frugally, saving his wages with the same discipline he applied to his work. While other young journeymen spent their money in taverns and gaming houses, Franklin paid his modest rent, bought simple food, and spent what little spare money he had on books. His lodgings were in a boarding house in Little Britain, a neighbourhood near St. Paul's Cathedral. He rented a small room, barely large enough for a bed and a small table, in a house full of other working men. The landlady provided simple meals, bread, cheese, and beer for breakfast, meat and vegetables for dinner. Franklin often skipped the beer, saving the money and avoiding the drowsiness that followed drinking. He spent his free time exploring London's intellectual life, a world that opened up possibilities he'd never imagined. London was the centre of the English-speaking world's literary and scientific culture. Coffee houses served as informal universities, where writers, thinkers and dilettantes gathered to read newspapers, discuss the latest publications, and debate everything from poetry to politics. Franklin became a regular at several coffee houses, particularly those near the print shops where he worked. For the price of a cup of coffee, a man could spend hours reading newspapers and journals that would have cost a week's wages to purchase. He could listen to conversations between educated men, learn about new ideas, and sometimes contribute his own thoughts. He visited bookshops, spending hours browsing volumes he couldn't afford to buy, but could read in part while standing in the shop. Booksellers generally tolerated this practice as long as customers were respectful and didn't damage the merchandise. Franklin would memorize passages from books he particularly admired, then return to his room to transcribe them from memory, testing his recall and absorbing the author's style. He befriended other young men of intellectual ambition, James Ralph, a would-be poet who had also come from Philadelphia, Charles Osborne and James Watson, aspiring writers who shared Franklin's love of literature. Together they formed an informal club, meeting to share their writings, critique each other's work and discuss books they had read. During this time, Franklin wrote and printed a pamphlet titled A Dissertation on Liberty and Necessity, Pleasure and Pain. It was a work of youthful philosophy, only about 4,000 words long, but it demonstrated his ability to construct logical arguments on the deepest questions. The pamphlet argued that if God is all-powerful and all-knowing, then free will is an illusion and morality is meaningless. Everything is predetermined by God's eternal knowledge. If God knew from eternity what every person would do, then those actions could not be otherwise. Therefore, no one truly chooses to be virtuous or vicious. Vice and virtue are equally natural, equally determined by God's plan. It was clever reasoning, but it led to conclusions Benjamin would later reject as naive and dangerous. The pamphlet made him some influential friends, including William Lyons, a surgeon and amateur scientist who was impressed by the young American's reasoning ability. But it also taught Franklin a lesson about ideas. Some thoughts are better left unpublished, or at least published with more maturity and consideration of their practical consequences. The moral relativism he'd argued for in the pamphlet would later seem to him not just wrong, but harmful. If morality has no basis, if virtue is meaningless, then what prevents society from descending into chaos? Franklin would spend much of his later life developing a practical ethical framework that avoided both religious dogmatism and moral nihilism. Despite his intellectual pursuits and steady employment, Benjamin was lonely. London offered endless distractions: theatres, pleasure gardens, taverns, brothels. But these cost money and ultimately left him feeling empty. He'd left behind Deborah Reed in Philadelphia with vague promises of marriage once he established himself. He'd written her often during his first months in London, pouring out his thoughts and feelings, describing the city, assuring her of his continued affection. But gradually the letters stopped. The distance was too great, the obstacles too numerous. He was an ocean away with no prospects of returning soon. Deborah was young and would have other suitors. Their understanding, never formalized, simply lapsed. Franklin later admitted that he felt guilty about this abandonment, recognizing that he had wronged her through his neglect. He met other women in London, had brief affairs that left no lasting impression in the historical record. The city offered plenty of opportunities for a young man to indulge his appetites, and Franklin was no saint. But these encounters, whatever they were, did not fill the void left by genuine connection. London also taught Franklin about the rigid class system that governed English society, a system far more inflexible than anything in the colonies. In America, at least in theory, a man could rise through talent and industry. In England, birth determined destiny almost absolutely. The aristocracy occupied a separate world, living in townhouses in Mayfair and Westminster, attended by armies of servants, moving in circles that ordinary tradesmen could never penetrate. Below them were the gentry, the wealthy merchants, the professionals. Then came the skilled tradesmen like Franklin. Below them, the unskilled labourers, the servants, the poor. Each class had its own dress, speech, manners, and expectations. Movement between classes was rare and difficult. A journeyman printer might become a master printer, and perhaps grow modestly wealthy, but he would never be a gentleman, never be received in aristocratic society, never be considered truly respectable by those above him. Franklin observed all this with his characteristic analytical detachment, noting the absurdity of a system that judged men by birth rather than merit. The experience reinforced his belief in the American experiment, where class lines, though they existed, were more porous and negotiable. By the spring of 1726, Benjamin had decided that London, magnificent as it was, would never offer him the opportunities he sought. The city was too established, too hierarchical, too bound by tradition. Here he would always be a skilled worker, respected within his trade but limited by it. In America, a man could rise. The opportunities there were real, the society more fluid. A printer who built a successful business could become a gentleman, could be respected not despite his origins but because of his achievements. He found a merchant named Thomas Denham who was returning to Philadelphia and needed a clerk. Denham offered Benjamin a job in his store, promising to teach him the merchant's trade. It meant leaving printing temporarily, but it offered passage home and the chance to learn another useful skill. Merchants could become wealthy in a way that journeymen printers never could. In July 1726, Benjamin Franklin boarded a ship bound for Philadelphia. He was 20 years old, returning with no more money than he'd left with 2 years earlier. But he was immeasurably richer in experience and knowledge. He had worked in the finest print shops in the English-speaking world, learning techniques and standards that few American printers possessed. He had conversed with London's intellectuals and observed the life of a great city. He had tested himself in the largest city on earth and not been found wanting. He had learned what he could and could not find in England. The voyage home took 11 weeks, far longer than usual due to contrary winds and storms. The ship was blown off course repeatedly, supplies ran low, and the crew and passengers began to fear they would run out of food and water before reaching land. Benjamin spent the time writing, recording his observations about the natural world with the same careful attention he applied to everything. He studied the ocean, noting the behaviour of dolphins that swam alongside the ship. He observed how they communicated with each other through sounds and movements. He watched them hunt fish, coordinating their efforts with what seemed like intelligence and planning. He studied the properties of water itself, noting how it behaved in waves, how it responded to the wind, how temperature affected its density. He made calculations about the ship's speed and position, trying to determine where they were when the clouds obscured the stars needed for navigation. He also recorded his thoughts on moral philosophy, beginning to develop the ethical framework that would guide his later life. In these shipboard writings, we can see him moving away from the moral relativism of his dissertation on liberty and necessity toward a more practical understanding of virtue. He began to articulate ideas that would later become famous, that virtue is its own reward, that doing good makes us happy, that society depends on mutual cooperation and trust, that a reputation for honesty is more valuable than immediate advantage gained through deception. These were not original philosophical insights. Countless thinkers before Franklin had articulated similar ideas, but Franklin was making them his own, testing them against his experience, converting abstract principles into practical rules for living. When the ship finally arrived in Philadelphia in October 1726, Benjamin Franklin stepped ashore a different person from the 18-year-old who had left. He had seen the world beyond colonial America. He had tested himself and proven his abilities. He had learned what he wanted and where he could find it. He was home, and he was ready to begin again. The Philadelphia that Benjamin returned to in 1726 felt like home in a way Boston never had. He resumed work as a printer, first in Thomas Denham's employment doing clerical work. But when Denham died suddenly a few months later, Benjamin returned to his true calling. He went back to work for Samuel Keimer, the eccentric printer who had first employed him. But the relationship was different now. Benjamin had worked in London's finest print shops. He had skills that far exceeded anything Keimer possessed. The arrangement could not last. Meanwhile, Benjamin discovered that his absence had cost him dearly in another way. Deborah Red, the girl he had courted before leaving for London, had married another man, a potter named John Rogers, who turned out to be a scoundrel with a wife already living in England. Rogers fled Philadelphia to escape debts and possible bigamy charges, leaving Deborah in an impossible position. She could not remarry while Rogers lived, but she could not find him to obtain a divorce. She was married and abandoned, trapped by the legal realities of the time. Benjamin, partly responsible for her situation through his own neglect, could only watch and regret. but there would be time to address that situation later. First, he needed to establish himself. In 1727, at age 21, Benjamin made two decisions that would shape the rest of his life. First, he gathered a group of young tradesmen and artisans to form a club dedicated to mutual improvement. They called it the Junto, a Spanish word meaning join together. The Junto met every Friday evening to discuss questions of morals, politics, and natural philosophy. Each member took turns proposing topics for debate. Is it permissible to tell a small lie to spare someone's feelings? What is the best form of government? Should the wealthy be required to support the poor? The discussions were structured, earnest, and remarkably sophisticated for a group of young men in their early 20s. But the Junto was more than a debating society. Members helped each other in business, shared books, and formed connections that would last for decades. Benjamin's closest friends for the rest of his life came from the Junto. It was his first experiment in creating what he called voluntary associations, organisations of citizens working together for mutual benefit. The second crucial decision was to establish his own printing business. He formed a partnership with Hugh Meredith, a fellow worker at Keimer's shop whose father agreed to provide the capital. In 1728, Franklin and Meredith opened their own print shop on Market Street. The timing was perfect. Keimer's business was failing due to his poor management and difficult personality. When Pennsylvania's government needed a printer, Franklin and Meredith submitted a bid and won the contract. Government printing provided steady income and credibility. Within a year, the partnership dissolved amicably when Meredith's drinking problems became unmanageable, and he decided to pursue farming instead. Franklin bought out his partner's share with borrowed money, and at age 24 became the sole proprietor of his own printing business. He worked with relentless energy, up before dawn, working late into the night, personally hauling paper through the streets in a wheelbarrow to demonstrate his industry. While other tradesmen spent their evenings in taverns, Franklin was at his press. His shop became known for producing the highest quality work in Philadelphia, delivered on time at fair prices. In 1729, Franklin bought a failing newspaper called the Pennsylvania Gazette and transformed it into the most successful paper in the colonies. He wrote many of the articles himself, mixing news with essays, humour, and practical information. The Gazette was lively, readable, and profitable. He also began publishing pamphlets on public issues. When Pennsylvania's legislature debated whether to issue paper currency, Franklin wrote a modest inquiry into the nature and necessity of a paper currency, arguing persuasively for the measure. The pamphlet swayed public opinion, the currency was issued, and Franklin's print shop received the lucrative contract to print the money. But his most successful publication was yet to come. In December 1732, Franklin published the first edition of Poor Richard's Almanac, a yearly calendar filled with weather predictions, astronomical information, and pithy sayings. Poor Richard was supposedly written by Richard Saunders, a henpecked husband who needed money. But everyone knew Franklin was the real author. The almanac featured his wit, his wisdom, and his genius for memorable phrases. Early to bed and early to rise makes a man healthy, wealthy, and wise. A penny saved is a penny earned. Fish and visitors stink after 3 days. God helps them that help themselves. 3 may keep a secret if 2 of them are dead. The sayings mixed practical advice with wry humour. They celebrated industry, thrift, and common sense, while mocking pretension and laziness. They became embedded in American culture, shaping the national character for generations. Poor Richard's Almanac sold 10,000 copies a year, an extraordinary number for colonial America. It made Franklin financially comfortable and culturally influential. He continued publishing it for 25 years, and it remained profitable throughout. By his late 20s, Benjamin Franklin had achieved remarkable success. He owned the most successful printing business in Philadelphia. He published the most widely read newspaper and almanac in the colonies. He was making money, building a reputation, and positioning himself for even greater achievements. But he was also building a home. In 1730, he entered into a common law marriage with Deborah Reed. Deborah's legal situation remained complicated. Her husband, John Rogers, was alive somewhere, which meant she could not legally remarry. But Rogers was not coming back, and the couple decided to live as husband and wife despite the legal technicality. It was a practical arrangement, and by all accounts, a happy one. Deborah was intelligent, hard-working, and managed Franklin's household and business affairs when he travelled. She ran the print shop's retail operations, selling books, paper, and other goods. She was a full partner in the enterprise. Their household included Benjamin's illegitimate son William, born around 1730 to a woman whose identity Franklin never revealed. Deborah raised William as her own, a generous act that speaks to her character. The couple had 2 children together, Francis and Sarah. Tragically, Francis died of smallpox at age 4, a loss that devastated both parents. Franklin's daily routine during these years established patterns that would last his lifetime. He rose early, often before dawn. He spent an hour in what he called powerful thinking, planning his day and examining his progress towards self-improvement. He worked through the morning at his printing business. He took a simple lunch, usually bread and butter. He worked through the afternoon. In the evening he read, wrote, or attended junto meetings. He allocated his time carefully, believing that wasted hours were lost forever. He developed a system of moral self-improvement based on 13 virtues: temperance, silence, order, resolution, frugality, industry, sincerity, justice, moderation, cleanliness, tranquility, chastity, and humility. He created a small book with a page for each virtue, marked into columns for each day of the week. Every evening he would mark his failures for that day with black dots. His goal was to achieve a clean page for each virtue before moving to the next. The project was characteristically systematic and characteristically Franklin. He never achieved perfection, but the process of trying shaped his character. The virtue he struggled with most was order, admitting that his papers and business affairs were often in disarray despite his best intentions. But by his own assessment and that of his contemporaries, Franklin's disciplined approach to self-improvement worked. He became known for his industry, his fairness in business, his reliability, and his intellectual curiosity. By age 30, Franklin's printing business was so successful that he could afford to hire managers and reduce his own direct involvement. This gave him time to pursue other interests, and it was at this point that Benjamin Franklin began to transform from a successful tradesman into something far more remarkable. He would become a scientist, an inventor, and a philosopher whose discoveries would echo through the centuries. The transformation began with questions. Why does smoke rise in a chimney? Why are some fabrics warmer than others? What causes the aurora borealis? Franklin approached these questions not as abstract curiosities, but as practical problems that might have practical solutions. His first significant invention addressed a common problem in colonial homes: inefficient heating. Traditional fireplaces sent most of their heat up the chimney, while filling rooms with smoke. Franklin designed a cast iron stove that could be placed in the middle of a room, radiating heat in all directions while venting smoke safely outside. The Pennsylvania fireplace, as he called it, later generations would call it the Franklin stove, was a marvel of practical engineering. It used significantly less wood than a traditional fireplace while producing much more heat. It made homes more comfortable and reduced the back-breaking labour of chopping and hauling firewood. The governor of Pennsylvania offered Franklin a patent which would have made him wealthy from the invention. Franklin refused. His reasoning was characteristic. As we enjoy great advantages from the inventions of others, we should be glad of an opportunity to serve others by any invention of ours, and this we should do freely and generously. He published detailed plans for the stove so that anyone could build or improve upon it. This pattern of sharing discoveries freely rather than profiting from them would define his scientific career. But the work that would make Franklin internationally famous was still ahead. It began with a simple observation about lightning. In the early 1740s, Franklin became fascinated by electricity, then one of the most mysterious phenomena in natural philosophy. European scientists had discovered that certain materials, when rubbed, could attract small objects or produce sparks. They called it the electric fire, and elaborate demonstrations of electrical phenomena had become popular entertainment among the wealthy. Travelling lecturers would perform electrical tricks for paying audiences. They would charge a person with electricity until sparks flew from their fingertips. They would make objects dance and move through invisible electrical forces. They would create spectacular sparks and glowing halos. But despite these dramatic demonstrations, no one truly understood what electricity was, how it worked, or what fundamental principles governed it. Franklin first encountered electrical demonstrations in Boston in 1746, when a travelling lecturer named Dr. Archibald Spencer performed experiments for fascinated audiences. Franklin attended one of these demonstrations and was immediately captivated. Here was a natural phenomenon that was clearly real, clearly powerful, but completely mysterious. It was exactly the kind of puzzle that appealed to his practical, systematic mind. He began conducting experiments, first learning everything that others had discovered, then pushing beyond into unexplored territory. He acquired a Leyden jar from Peter Collinson, a London merchant and amateur scientist who became one of Franklin's most important correspondents. The Leyden jar was a device that could store electrical charge, essentially the first electrical capacitor. It consisted of a glass jar with metal foil coating the inside and outside surfaces, and it could deliver a powerful shock when discharged. Franklin began systematically testing its properties, conducting experiment after experiment, recording his observations with meticulous care. He would charge the jar and then test what happened when he touched various parts of it. He discovered that the charge resided not in the metal foil, but in the glass itself, in what he called the electric matter trapped between the two conducting surfaces. Through careful experimentation, Franklin made several crucial discoveries that would transform scientific understanding of electricity. He identified positive and negative electrical charges, the terms we still use today. He realized that electricity was not created when objects were rubbed together, but rather transferred from one object to another. An object that gained electricity, what he called positive, did so at the expense of another object that lost electricity, what he called negative. This was a fundamental insight. Previous experimenters had thought there were two different kinds of electricity that could be created through friction. Franklin proved there was only one kind, and electrical phenomena resulted from imbalances in the distribution of this single electrical fluid. He demonstrated that electrical charge is conserved, that it flows from one place to another rather than being created or destroyed. In a series of ingenious experiments, he showed that the total amount of electrical charge in a closed system remains constant. If one object gains a positive charge, another must have lost an equal amount, becoming negatively charged. This principle of conservation would become one of the foundations of electrical science, with implications that extended far beyond Franklin's experiments. It was a discovery of truly fundamental importance, placing electricity among the natural forces that obeyed quantifiable mathematical laws. Franklin also developed the concept of electrical grounding, demonstrating that electrical charge would flow into the Earth if given a conducting path. This observation would prove crucial for his most famous invention, the lightning rod, but it also represented a deeper understanding of how electricity behaves. He conducted experiments showing that electrical charge concentrated at pointed objects, a phenomenon he called the power of points. When a charged object was brought near a sharp point, the electrical charge would stream off the point in what Franklin described as an electrical wind. This discovery too would prove essential for understanding and protecting against lightning. But the discovery that would make Franklin internationally famous came from a bold hypothesis. Lightning was electrical in nature, the same phenomenon that produced sparks when you shuffled across a carpet in winter, only on a vastly larger scale. The idea was not entirely original. Several European scientists had speculated about the possibility, but Franklin was the first to propose a practical experiment to test it definitively, and he was the first to actually conduct such a test successfully. He initially proposed using a tall pointed rod erected on a hill or tall building. During a thunderstorm, if lightning was indeed electrical, the rod should become charged and produce sparks when a grounded conductor was brought near its base. He wrote up this proposal and sent it to his London correspondents, suggesting that someone should attempt the experiment. In France, Franklin's proposal was read with great interest. In May 1752, French scientists successfully conducted the experiment at Marly-la-Ville near Paris, using a 40-foot iron rod erected in an open field. During a thunderstorm, sparks flew from the rod, proving that storm clouds were indeed electrically charged. The experiment was repeated across Europe with the same results. Franklin's hypothesis was confirmed before he had conducted his own test. But Franklin, unaware of the European experiments, was still planning his demonstration. He had intended to conduct it from the top of Christ Church's steeple in Philadelphia, which was then under construction. When construction delays prevented this approach, Franklin designed an alternative method that has become the most famous scientific experiment in American history. The experiment took place in Philadelphia in June 1752, though the exact date is uncertain. Franklin had designed a kite with a wire attached to its tip and extending about a foot above the kite. The kite was made of silk rather than paper to better withstand the wet conditions of a thunderstorm. He attached a metal key to the hemp string near the bottom, and between the key and his hand he tied a silk ribbon. Silk, being an insulator when dry, would protect him from electrical shock. Franklin and his son William went to a field on the outskirts of Philadelphia as storm clouds gathered. They raised the kite and waited. As rain began to fall, nothing happened. The hemp string was dry, and dry hemp is a poor conductor of electricity. But as the rain continued and the string became thoroughly wet, something remarkable occurred. The loose fibers of the hemp string began to stand erect, repelled by the electrical charge they were conducting. Franklin knew immediately that his hypothesis was correct. He brought his knuckle close to the metal key and drew a spark, then another. He could draw sparks repeatedly from the key as long as the storm lasted. Lightning was electricity. The heavens and the laboratory were governed by the same principles. Franklin had proved it through direct experimentation. The experiment was extraordinarily dangerous, and Franklin was fortunate not to have been killed. He later learned of several European scientists who attempted similar experiments and died from electrical shock. A Swedish scientist named Georg Wilhelm Richman was killed in 1753 while attempting to draw electricity from a thunderstorm using a rod in his home. The discharge struck him in the head and killed him instantly. Franklin's survival was partly luck and partly his careful use of the silk ribbon insulator. But the risk was real, and he later cautioned others against attempting such direct experiments with lightning. He published his findings in letters to Peter Collinson, who shared them with the Royal Society of London. These letters were compiled into a book, Experiments and Observations on Electricity, made at Philadelphia in America. The work was published in London in 1751 and quickly translated into French, German, and Italian. The response from the European scientific community was immediate and enthusiastic. Here was original research of the highest quality, conducted not in a well-funded European laboratory, but in a colonial print shop by a self-taught natural philosopher. Franklin's careful experimental method, his clear reasoning, his practical insights all marked him as a scientist of the first rank. The Royal Society of London awarded him the Copley Medal in 1753, their highest honour, equivalent to what would later become the Nobel Prize. The citation praised his curious experiments and observations on electricity. Yale College awarded him an honorary Master of Arts degree in 1753. Harvard followed with the same honour. The University of St. Andrews in Scotland made him a Doctor of Laws in 1759. Oxford University granted him a Doctor of Civil Law degree in 1762. The boy who never finished formal schooling was now Dr. Franklin, honoured by the most prestigious universities in the English-speaking world. He was elected to the Royal Society in 1756, joining Newton, Boyle, and the other giants of scientific inquiry. But Franklin's interest in electricity was never purely theoretical. He immediately applied his discoveries to practical problems, demonstrating the pragmatic genius that defined his entire scientific career. If lightning was electrical, then buildings could be protected from lightning strikes by installing metal rods that would conduct the charge safely into the ground. The pointed rod would attract the electrical charge from storm clouds. The metal would conduct it down the side of the building, and a wire buried in the earth would dissipate the charge harmlessly into the ground. Franklin invented the lightning rod in 1752 and published instructions for installing them. Within a few years, they were being installed on buildings throughout America and Europe. Churches, which were often the tallest structures in their communities and frequently struck by lightning, were among the first to adopt the new technology. The impact was immediate and dramatic. Buildings that would have burned were protected. The terrifying phenomenon of a lightning strike, often interpreted as divine judgment, became manageable through human ingenuity. How many structures were saved from fire by this simple invention? How many lives preserved? The number is beyond counting, but it is certainly in the thousands, perhaps tens of thousands over the centuries since Franklin's invention. There was religious opposition, of course. Some clergy argued that lightning rods were impious, an attempt to interfere with God's will. If God wanted to strike a building with lightning, who were humans to prevent it? But the practical benefit was so obvious that the objections faded quickly. Even the most pious recognized that using human reason to understand natural phenomena and protect human life was not contrary to God's purposes. He also invented bifocal glasses, allowing people to see both near and far without changing spectacles. He invented the flexible urinary catheter to help his brother John, who suffered from bladder stones. He studied ocean currents and created the first chart of the Gulf Stream, helping ships cross the Atlantic more quickly. He developed a phonetic alphabet to make English spelling more logical. He invented a glass harmonica, a musical instrument that Mozart and Beethoven would compose for. Every invention, every discovery was motivated by practical benefit. How can we make life better, safer, more comfortable, more efficient? This was Franklin's constant question. By the early 1750s, Benjamin Franklin had achieved more than most men accomplish in a full lifetime. He was financially independent, scientifically renowned, and actively involved in improving his community through the voluntary associations he had helped create. The junto had spun off numerous projects. Franklin had founded America's first subscription library in 1731, allowing members to pool resources to purchase books that no individual could afford. The Library Company of Philadelphia still exists today. He had helped establish Pennsylvania's first fire insurance company, using the principle of mutual aid to protect citizens from catastrophic loss. He had organized the Union Fire Company, Philadelphia's first volunteer fire department. He had founded the American Philosophical Society, modelled on the Royal Society of London, to advance scientific knowledge. He had helped establish Pennsylvania Hospital, America's first general hospital, and the Academy of Philadelphia, which would grow into the University of Pennsylvania. In each case, Franklin's method was the same: identify a need, propose a solution, gather others to support it, and implement it through voluntary cooperation. He had a genius for organization and an ability to convince others to contribute to the common good. But as the 1750s progressed, Franklin's attention was increasingly drawn away from science and civic improvement toward politics. The relationship between Britain's American colonies and the mother country was becoming strained, and Franklin would find himself at the center of the crisis that would tear the empire apart and create a new nation. The shift from scientist to statesman was gradual but inexorable. In 1751, Franklin was elected to the Pennsylvania Assembly, the colony's legislative body. It was the beginning of a political career that would last until the end of his life. His first major political project was the Albany Plan of Union, proposed in 1754. Representatives from 7 colonies gathered in Albany, New York, to discuss common defense against French and Indian threats. Franklin proposed that the colonies form a unified government for matters of defense and westward expansion, while maintaining their individual identities for local affairs. The plan was visionary, prefiguring the federal structure that would eventually govern the United States. But it was rejected by both the colonial assemblies, who feared losing power, and the British government, which feared the colonies becoming too independent. Yet the idea had been planted. Colonial unity was possible, even if not yet achievable. In 1757, the Pennsylvania Assembly sent Franklin to London as their agent, tasked with representing colonial interests to the British government. It was supposed to be a temporary mission. Franklin would remain abroad for most of the next 18 years. He sailed from Philadelphia in June 1757, leaving Deborah behind. She refused to cross the ocean, terrified of sea travel. William, now grown and appointed Royal Governor of New Jersey, accompanied his father. They would not return to Philadelphia until 1762, and even then, only briefly. London in the 1750s was familiar to Franklin from his youthful residence 3 decades earlier, but his circumstances had changed dramatically. He was no longer an anonymous journeyman printer, but an internationally famous scientist and colonial representative. He was welcomed into the best intellectual circles. He dined with members of Parliament, corresponded with leading scientists, and became friends with some of the most influential thinkers in Britain. David Hume, the great philosopher, became a close friend. Lord Keynes, Adam Smith, and Joseph Priestley all valued his company and conversation. He was inducted into the Royal Society of London and attended meetings regularly, contributing to discussions on everything from the salinity of seawater to the effectiveness of smallpox inoculation. But his primary mission was political, and here he faced increasing frustration. The British government was beginning to view the American colonies as sources of revenue rather than as self-governing entities within the empire. New taxes and regulations were being considered, designed to make the colonies pay for their own defence and contribute to Britain's imperial expenses. Franklin worked to educate British officials about American realities. The colonists, he argued, were loyal British subjects who simply wanted to be treated fairly. They would gladly contribute to the empire's well-being if asked properly, but they resented being taxed without representation in Parliament. his arguments fell on deaf ears. The British political class viewed Americans as ungrateful provincials who needed to be reminded of their subordinate status. In 1765, Parliament passed the Stamp Act, requiring that newspapers, legal documents, and other papers carry a tax stamp purchased from the British government. It was the first direct tax imposed on the colonies by Parliament, and the reaction was explosive. Americans rioted in the streets. They burned stamp distributors in effigy, destroyed property, and organised boycotts of British goods. The cry of no taxation without representation echoed through every colonial town. Franklin in London initially thought the colonists were overreacting, but when he testified before Parliament in February 1766, he delivered a masterful defence of the American position. He explained that the colonists distinguished between external taxes, tariffs on trade, and internal taxes, direct taxation of colonial economic activity. They would accept the former as regulation of trade, but viewed the latter as tyranny. His testimony was published and widely read. It helped persuade Parliament to repeal the Stamp Act, though they simultaneously passed the Declaratory Act, asserting their right to tax the colonies in all cases whatsoever. The crisis was postponed, not resolved. Franklin remained in London, hoping to bridge the growing divide between Britain and America. He continued to represent Pennsylvania, and eventually Georgia, New Jersey, and Massachusetts as well. He was America's primary voice in London, but events were moving beyond his control. The British government continued pushing for revenue from the colonies. The Townshend Acts of 1767 imposed new taxes on glass, lead, paint, paper, and tea. Again, Americans resisted. Again, boycotts were organised. Tensions escalated. In 1770, British soldiers in Boston fired on a crowd of protesters, killing 5. The Boston Massacre became a rallying cry for colonial resistance. Franklin watched with growing alarm as the situation deteriorated. He published anonymous essays in British newspapers, satirising British policy and defending American rights. He tried to use his personal connections to influence policy. But the British government was determined to assert its authority, and American colonists were equally determined to resist. The breaking point came in December 1773, when Boston radicals, disguised as Mohawk Indians, dumped 342 chests of British tea into Boston Harbour to protest the Tea Act. The Boston Tea Party was an act of defiance that the British government could not ignore. Parliament responded with the Coercive Acts, called the Intolerable Acts in America. Boston's port was closed. Massachusetts's charter was revoked. A military governor was appointed. British troops would be quartered in private homes if necessary. Franklin was in London when news of these measures arrived. He knew they would push the colonies toward rebellion. He made one final effort at reconciliation, proposing compromises that might satisfy both sides. But in January 1774, he was summoned before the Privy Council. What followed was one of the most humiliating experiences of Franklin's life. He was publicly accused of stealing letters from the Massachusetts governor and sending them to Boston to inflame resistance. He was called a thief and a liar. The Solicitor General, Alexander Wedderburn, delivered an hour-long speech attacking Franklin's character, his honesty, his loyalty to the crown. Franklin stood silent throughout the abuse, his face expressionless. But inside, something broke. He'd spent 18 years trying to preserve the British Empire through reasonable compromise. That effort was over. In March 1775, Franklin left London and sailed for Philadelphia. He arrived on May 5, 1775, to find that war had already begun. British troops and colonial militia had clashed at Lexington and Concord 3 weeks earlier. The American Revolution had started. At age 69, Benjamin Franklin was about to help create a nation. The Pennsylvania Assembly elected Franklin as a delegate to the Second Continental Congress the day after he arrived in Philadelphia. He immediately became one of the most influential voices in that body, second only to his fellow delegate from Virginia, George Washington. Franklin was assigned to numerous committees. He helped draft the Declaration of Independence, though the primary author was Thomas Jefferson. Franklin made several important edits to Jefferson's draft, including changing "We hold these truths to be sacred and undeniable" to the more elegant and forceful "We hold these truths to be self-evident." On July 4th, 1726, the Continental Congress adopted the Declaration of Independence. Franklin was one of the first to sign it, affixing his name to a document that declared him a traitor to the British Crown. If the revolution failed, he would hang. But Franklin's most crucial service to the revolution would not take place in America. In September 1776, Congress appointed him commissioner to France, tasked with securing French military and financial support for the American cause. He sailed in October 1776 at age 70, crossing the Atlantic in wartime, risking capture by British warships. The voyage took 6 weeks. He arrived in France in December and immediately set to work on the most important diplomatic mission of his life. The French court was initially cautious. France had been Britain's enemy for centuries, and the prospect of weakening Britain by supporting the American rebels was attractive. But open alliance with revolutionaries was risky. If America lost, France would have wasted resources and antagonized Britain for nothing. Franklin's task was to convince France that America would win, that French support would be rewarded with trade and alliance, and that this was France's opportunity to redress the balance of power in Europe. He approached the challenge with the same practical genius he had applied to everything else in his life. Rather than dressing like a European courtier in silk and powder, Franklin presented himself as a simple American in a plain brown coat and a fur cap. He cultivated the image of the noble rustic philosopher from the New World, wise but unpretentious, natural rather than artificial. The French adored him. Parisian society embraced this charming old man who spoke their language imperfectly but eloquently, who understood their philosophers and scientists, who was equally comfortable at Versailles and in a cafe. Women found him fascinating. Intellectuals sought his conversation. His image appeared on medallions, snuff boxes, and prints throughout Paris. But beneath the charm was serious diplomatic work. Franklin negotiated, lobbied, gathered intelligence, and cultivated relationships with every influential figure in French politics. He worked with Silas Deane and Arthur Lee, the other American commissioners, though both men proved difficult colleagues. The breakthrough came in October 1777 when news reached Paris of the American victory at Saratoga. General Horatio Gates had defeated a British army under General Burgoyne, capturing over 5,000 troops. It was proof that America could win battles against British regulars. France decided to commit. In February 1778, Franklin signed 2 treaties with the French government. The Treaty of Amity and Commerce established trade relations. The Treaty of Alliance bound France to military support for American independence, committing French troops, ships, and money to the American cause. It was the diplomatic triumph that made American victory possible. Without French support, the revolution likely would have failed. Washington's army was perpetually undermanned, undersupplied, and outmatched by professional British forces. French military aid, including the crucial naval support at Yorktown in 1781, tipped the balance. Franklin remained in France for the duration of the war, managing the complex relationship between allies who spoke different languages and had different goals. He secured loans and supplies, he handled prisoner exchanges, he countered British propaganda. He lived in a beautiful estate in Passy, on the outskirts of Paris, where he entertained constantly and conducted his diplomatic work with grace and skill. He also found time to enjoy himself. He flirted with intelligent French women, including the brilliant Madame Helvetius, a widow whom he actually proposed to. She declined. He attended salons and scientific lectures. He published essays and invented new devices, including bifocal glasses during this period. In 1781, British General Cornwallis surrendered at Yorktown. The war was effectively over, though peace negotiations dragged on for 2 more years. Franklin was appointed one of the American Peace Commissioners, along with John Adams and John Jay. The Treaty of Paris, signed in September 1783, recognized American independence and established generous boundaries for the new nation. Franklin's diplomatic skill was crucial in securing these terms. He played Britain, France, and Spain off against each other, maximizing American gains while maintaining friendships where possible. At 77 years old, Benjamin Franklin had helped midwife a nation into existence. His diplomatic achievements rivaled any in American history. But he was tired, and he wanted to go home. He requested permission to return to America in 1785. Congress granted it reluctantly, as Franklin was irreplaceable in Paris. He said his farewells, received honours from the French court, and in July 1785 boarded a ship for Philadelphia. He would never see Europe again. The remaining 5 years of his life would be spent in the nation he had helped create, contributing to its final founding act. Franklin arrived in Philadelphia in September 1785 to a hero's welcome. Cannons fired salutes. Bells rang throughout the city. Crowds lined the streets. At 79 years old, after 9 years abroad, he was home. He moved into a house on Market Street that his daughter Sarah and her husband Richard Bache had prepared for him. Deborah had died in 1774 while Franklin was in London, a loss that haunted him with guilt for not having been there. But his daughter provided a loving household, and his grandchildren brought joy to his final years. He could have retired completely, resting on his extraordinary achievements. But retirement was not in Benjamin Franklin's nature. Almost immediately, he was drawn back into public service. Pennsylvania elected him president of the Supreme Executive Council, essentially governor of the state, a position he held for 3 years. At the same time, he was dealing with painful physical ailments. He suffered from gout, kidney stones, and other afflictions of old age. The kidney stones were particularly agonizing, and he began using laudanum, opium dissolved in alcohol, to manage the pain. Yet in 1787, when Pennsylvania selected delegates to the Constitutional Convention in Philadelphia, Franklin was chosen despite his age and infirmity. He was the oldest delegate present, nearly twice the age of most attendees. The Constitutional Convention met from May to September 1787, tasked with creating a new framework for the federal government. The Articles of Confederation, under which the nation had operated since independence, were proving inadequate. The federal government was too weak to govern effectively. Franklin attended nearly every session, though he said little during the debates. His physical condition made prolonged speaking difficult, and his voice, never strong, had weakened with age. But when he did speak, everyone listened. The convention nearly collapsed several times over disputes between large and small states, slave and free states, commercial and agricultural interests. The delegates were brilliant men with strong opinions, and compromise seemed impossible. At the crucial moment, when the convention appeared ready to break up without agreement, Franklin delivered a speech that he'd written out and asked James Wilson to read on his behalf. The speech was both humble and wise, acknowledging that no one had all the answers, that this constitution would be imperfect, but that it was the best compromise possible. I confess that there are several parts of this constitution which I do not at present approve, Franklin admitted, but I am not sure I shall never approve them. For having lived long, I've experienced many instances of being obliged by better information or fuller consideration to change opinions even on important subjects, which I once thought right, but found to be otherwise. He urged the delegates to doubt their own infallibility and support the document despite its flaws. His speech helped break the deadlock. Delegates who had been intransigent reconsidered. The Constitution was completed and signed on September 17th, 1787. Franklin was one of the signers, his shaking hand guided across the page. He was now the only person to have signed all 4 founding documents of the United States: the Declaration of Independence, the Treaty of Alliance with France, the Treaty of Paris, and the Constitution. As he signed, he looked at the sun painted on the back of the president's chair and remarked to those nearby that throughout the convention he had wondered whether it was a rising or setting sun. But now at length I have the happiness to know that it is a rising and not a setting sun. It was a characteristically optimistic observation from a man who had seen America rise from colonial dependence to independent nation. Franklin's final years were spent largely at home, surrounded by family and visited by admirers from around the world. His house became a pilgrimage site for those who wanted to meet the great philosopher and statesman. He continued writing, working on his autobiography in sections when strength permitted. The autobiography of Benjamin Franklin, though never completed, would become one of the most influential books in American history, teaching generations the value of self-improvement, industry, and practical wisdom. He also turned his attention to one final moral crusade. Having owned slaves earlier in his life, Franklin had gradually come to see slavery as a moral abomination. In his final years, he became president of the Pennsylvania Society for promoting the abolition of slavery. In February 1790, just weeks before his death, he signed a petition to Congress calling for the abolition of slavery. It was one of his last public acts, a reminder that even in his 80s, Franklin was still fighting for human freedom and dignity. By early 1790, it was clear that Franklin's body was failing. The kidney stones caused constant agony. He could barely walk. He spent most of his time in bed, reading, receiving visitors, and managing his pain with increasing doses of laudanum. On April 17, 1790, Benjamin Franklin died in his bed at home, surrounded by family. He was 84 years old. The cause was likely complications from the kidney stones and general organ failure. News of his death spread quickly through Philadelphia, and then across the nation and to Europe. The tributes were extraordinary. The French National Assembly declared 3 days of mourning, the first time that body had honoured a foreigner. The American Congress wore mourning badges for a month. His funeral, held on April 21st, was the largest Philadelphia had ever seen. 20,000 people, half the city's population, attended. They followed the casket to Christ Church Burial Ground, where Franklin was laid to rest beside Deborah. His grave marker is simple, as he requested in his will: Benjamin and Deborah Franklin. No titles, no honours, just their names. Visitors still leave pennies on the grave, honouring poor Richard's wisdom about thrift. But Franklin had also written his own epitaph decades earlier, a playful meditation on his life and beliefs. The body of B. Franklin, printer, like the cover of an old book, its contents torn out and stripped of its lettering and gilding, lies here, food for worms, but the work shall not be wholly lost, for it will, as he believed, appear once more in a new and more perfect edition, corrected and amended by the author. It captured his wit, his optimism, his view of himself as fundamentally a printer, and his hope for something beyond death. Whether he truly believed in the new edition, or was simply making an elegant metaphor, we cannot know. But the epitaph was never carved on his tomb. He had asked for simplicity, and simplicity is what he received. The legacy Benjamin Franklin left behind was vast and multifaceted, touching nearly every aspect of American life and extending across the Atlantic to influence European thought as well. As a scientist, his discoveries about electricity transformed human understanding of natural forces. The lightning rod alone saved countless buildings and lives. His fundamental insights about positive and negative charge, about electrical conduction and insulation, laid groundwork for everything from telegraphy to modern power distribution. As an inventor, his practical genius produced devices that made life better. The Franklin stove, bifocals, the flexible catheter, the glass harmonica. Unlike most inventors, he refused to patent his creations, believing that knowledge should be freely shared for the public good. As a writer, his autobiography became required reading for ambitious Americans, teaching self-improvement through discipline and industry. Poor Richard's Almanac shaped American values and speech, embedding his wisdom in the language itself. As a civic organizer, he pioneered the concept of voluntary associations working for public benefit. The library, fire company, hospital, and university he helped found in Philadelphia became models copied across America. The idea that citizens could band together to solve community problems without waiting for government or aristocratic patronage was revolutionary. As a diplomat, he secured the French alliance that made American independence possible. His Treaty of Paris established generous boundaries for the new nation. His work in France demonstrated that Americans could hold their own among European sophisticates. As a founding father, he helped draft the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, contributing crucial wisdom at key moments. His presence lent legitimacy and credibility to American independence. But perhaps his most enduring legacy is as the embodiment of a new kind of human being, the self-made American. Born into poverty with no advantages beyond intelligence and determination, Franklin rose to international fame through his own efforts. He proved that in the New World, talent mattered more than birth, that practical wisdom could rival classical education, that a tradesman could become a gentleman through virtue rather than inheritance. The values he championed, industry, frugality, self-improvement, civic responsibility, practical innovation, intellectual curiosity, became core elements of American identity. The American dream owes much to Franklin's example. He was not perfect. He could be vain, calculating, and manipulative. He neglected his wife, probably fathered an illegitimate child, and owned slaves for part of his life. His relationship with his son William, who remained loyal to Britain during the Revolution, ended in permanent estrangement. But his achievements so vastly outweighed his flaws that even his critics acknowledged his greatness. John Adams, who often disagreed with Franklin and resented his popularity, nevertheless called him a great and good man. Today, Franklin's presence remains inescapable in American life. His face appears on the $100 bill. His name graces streets, schools, and institutions across the nation. The organizations he founded, the Library Company, the American Philosophical Society, the University of Pennsylvania, continue their work. His inventions remain in use. His words are quoted daily, often by people who don't realize they're quoting him. Walk into any public library in America, and you're experiencing Franklin's legacy. The concept of free public libraries supported by citizens for mutual benefit was his innovation. Every fire department staffed by volunteers traces back to his Union Fire Company. Every civic organization working to improve communities follows the model he established with the Untold. Scientists studying electricity stand on foundations he laid. Diplomats practicing practical statecraft can look to his example. Writers seeking clear, vigorous prose can study his style. Anyone attempting self-improvement can learn from his methodical approach. Benjamin Franklin never climbed a mountain, but he drew lightning from the sky. He never commanded armies, but he helped win a war. He never held supreme power, but he helped create a nation. The runaway apprentice became one of the most influential human beings in history, and he did it all through curiosity, discipline, and the conviction that ordinary people working together could accomplish extraordinary things. Consider the journey we've traced tonight, from a tallow chandler's shop in Boston to the salons of Paris, from a teenage runaway with bread under his arms to the friend of kings and philosophers, from Poor Richard to the sage of the American Revolution. It was a life that spanned nearly the entire 18th century, that witnessed and helped create the transformation from colonial dependence to national independence. Benjamin Franklin proved that genius could emerge from anywhere, that education could be self-directed, that practical wisdom could rival academic learning, that a tradesman could become a statesman, and that one person's curiosity and effort could genuinely change the world. He was the first American celebrity, the first American scientist of international renown, and in many ways the first recognizably modern American. The values he embodied, pragmatism, innovation, self-reliance, civic duty, and the belief that tomorrow can be better than today, remains central to American identity. 230 years after his death, Benjamin Franklin's light still illuminates. His life reminds us that circumstances of birth need not determine destiny, that knowledge pursued with discipline opens doors, that service to community enriches individual lives, and that one person committed to making things better actually can. The boy who loved to read by candlelight brought electricity to the world. The apprentice who ran away with nothing built institutions that endure. The tradesman who never attended university became a doctor of philosophy in the eyes of the world's finest institutions. If you've journeyed with me through this remarkable story, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Tell me in the comments what aspect of Franklin's life struck you most. I read every comment and always love hearing your thoughts. Until our next journey into the past, I wish you a calm and peaceful night. Benjamin Franklin's sun was indeed rising, not setting, and in the nation he helped create, in the values he championed, in the institutions he founded, that sun still shines. Good night.